In the summer of 1872, in the quiet hills of Vermont, a boy arrived who seemed like any other orphan of the war. But soon livestock began to die, neighbors whispered of strange happenings, and a series of deaths would forever stain the countryside with dread. His name was Nathaniel Whitmore, and to some he looked like a blessing, yet to others a curse wrapped in the body of a child. What would you have thought if you lived next to him? Would you have trusted him or run? Comment your guess below before we reveal what happened next. The war had ended 7 years earlier, but Vermont still carried its scars. Farmlands stretched across the valleys like open wounds. Fences, broken barns, collapsed homes half rebuilt by widows who had learned to endure hunger in silence. In that summer of 1872, Jonathan and Margaret Whitmore took in their nephew Nathaniel, an 8-year-old boy whose parents had been swallowed by war and sickness. His father had fallen at Gettysburg, his mother consumed by tuberculosis. With no siblings left, the boy arrived at the Whitmore farm, carrying only a faded cloth bag and a silver pocket watch that no longer ticked. The Whitmores were not natural caretakers. Jonathan, once a proud Union soldier, had returned broken by the things he had seen, his back stiff, his nights haunted. Margaret, sharp-tongued and weary, carried bitterness like a second skin after years of childlessness. They accepted Nathaniel out of duty, not love, hoping his small hands might ease the endless labor of the farm. To their neighbors, the arrangement seemed practical. But behind the Whitmore fence, the boy's presence soon began to unnerve. Nathaniel was polite, almost too polite. He spoke rarely, answering adults with "yes, sir," and "yes, ma'am," never interrupting, never laughing too loud. He worked from sunrise to sunset, hoeing rows of corn without complaint, hauling water far beyond his strength. When other children in Montpelier played by the river, Nathaniel watched from a distance, his pale face unreadable. What unsettled those who looked closer was his pocket watch, its frozen hands set forever at 3:30. He carried it everywhere, clicking the lid open then shut again and again as if waiting for time itself to move. Dr. Elias Morton first noticed the boy at the general store that June. Morton, once a field surgeon in the war, had grown practiced in reading men's faces. He could spot fear in a soldier's eyes before a charge, or the shadow of death before a wound turned fatal. Something in Nathaniel's gaze disturbed him. It wasn't shyness nor mischief. The boy studied him steady, unblinking, as though weighing the doctor in the same way Morton might study a patient's pulse. Later in his journal, Morton wrote, "The child is courteous in every way, yet he unsettles me. His eyes carry a kind of watchfulness I cannot explain." Around the Whitmore farm, small oddities grew. The Colemans next door noticed their chickens huddled and shrieking when Nathaniel lingered near the fence. Horses skittishly refused to cross the meadow if the boy was there. Margaret once found their old sheepdog, loyal for years, bolting into the woods after Nathaniel had stood silently at the barnyard gate. "The animals sensed something," she whispered to Jonathan, but he only shrugged, too tired to argue. The unease turned to horror in July. Emily Parker, 5 years old and known in town for her bright laughter, wandered down to the brook that curved through the valley. When she didn't return for supper, her mother called the neighbors. Just as panic spread, Nathaniel appeared at the Parker doorstep. His clothes were damp, his hair matted, his face pale but calm. "I found Emily by the creek," he said evenly. "She isn't breathing." The search party followed him to the shallow stream. There, Emily lay face down in barely 2 feet of water, her small dress snagged on a branch. Dr. Morton, summoned quickly, confirmed she had drowned. A tragic accident, the kind all too common in rural summers when children roamed freely. Yet what chilled him was Nathaniel's account. The boy described in exact detail the position of Emily's arms, the tilt of her head, the way her ribbons had floated in the current. His recall was clinical, as though he had memorized the scene before anyone else arrived. At the funeral, the town gathered under the wooden rafters of the church. Mothers wept openly. Fathers gripped their hats tight, and Emily's mother collapsed at the sight of the tiny coffin. Nathaniel sat beside his aunt and uncle, his head bowed respectfully. But when the congregation wept, his eyes remained dry. Margaret, watching him from the corner of her eye, saw no trace of grief, only a strange, intent observation, as though he were cataloging every sob, every tremor, every gasp. And in his hand, hidden just below the pew, his broken watch clicked open and shut. Later that night, Margaret swore the hands of the watch had moved, though Jonathan insisted it was only her imagination. The death might have passed as a sorrowful accident, had it not been for the growing whispers. Why was it Nathaniel who found her? Why could he describe so much too much? And still livestock continued to die, chickens with broken necks, calves tangled in ropes. The Colemans began bolting their doors at night, though they could never explain why. Dr. Morton, meanwhile, added another entry to his journal. The boy is always there, always helpful. Yet I cannot dismiss the chill I feel in his presence. This is not ordinary grief or misfortune. Something else is at work. And so the first tragedy in Montpelier would soon be followed by another one, far more difficult to dismiss as chance. The whispers did not fade after Emily Parker's burial. If anything, they grew sharper like knives passed hand to hand in hushed kitchens and candlelit parlors. Mothers pulled their children closer when Nathaniel passed in the street, though he greeted them with the same flawless politeness. Farmers began chaining their barn doors twice at night, as if rope and iron could keep out a shadow they could not name. Yet outwardly, Nathaniel remained the picture of obedience. He rose early, worked the fields without complaint, and never once spoke back to his aunt or uncle. His manners were immaculate, his posture straight, his words carefully measured. Only the animals seemed to know better. At the Coleman farm, their flock of chickens grew restless whenever Nathaniel walked near the fence line. The birds squawked and huddled together, refusing to forage where his shadow fell. They act like there's a fox prowling misses. Coleman said one evening, but the only thing near them is that Whitmore boy. Her husband dismissed it, yet his brow furrowed when he saw their mare refuse to leave the stable while Nathaniel lingered in the yard. Even the old hound who once guarded the farm faithfully began to whine and retreat whenever Nathaniel's pale figure appeared at the edge of the pasture. Dr. Elias Morton noted all of this. He visited the Whitmores often under the guise of tending Jonathan's old war wound, but in truth his eyes rarely left the boy. Nathaniel carried himself not like a child, but like a small machine, tireless, unyielding. He would hoe the soil until sweat streamed down his thin arms, yet he never paused to play, never strayed to chase butterflies or toss stones in the brook. Children should stumble, scrape their knees, laugh too loud, Morton wrote in his journal. This one does none of that. He works as if he has no use for play. It was on a hot afternoon in late August that the second tragedy struck. Gustav Nielsen, a Norwegian immigrant who had spent his younger years felling timber in the northern forests, was found dead at the base of a cliff known locally as Devil's Ledge. He was a man of habit, tending the wild beehives along the ridge each week without fail. On that day, it was Nathaniel who raised the alarm. The boy appeared in town, his face pale, his voice calm as ever. I saw Mr. Nielsen's hat caught on a thorn bush, he told a gathering crowd. I called for him, but he did not answer. I climbed down and I found him. The townsmen rushed to the ledge where Gustav's body lay twisted on the rocks. His neck had snapped clean, death instant and brutal. Yet what disturbed Dr. Morton most was not the fall itself, but the scene surrounding it. Scattered around the body were dozens of dead bees, far too many to have strayed so far from a hive. Their small husks littered the stones like seeds spilled from a broken jar. Morton climbed the ledge himself, expecting to find a hive disturbed branches clawed apart. Instead, the hive stood intact, humming peacefully, as bees busied themselves among the late summer blooms. There had been no swarm, no disturbance, nothing to explain why the insects clustered only at the sight of Gustav's broken body. When questioned, Nathaniel suggested, maybe the bees stung him. He always said they grew angry when he disturbed them. His tone was casual, almost helpful, as though offering the doctor a theory in good faith. But Morton's unease deepened. The boy's story was too neat, his voice too calm. The bees, he suspected, were not coincidence, but placement. At Gustav's funeral, Nathaniel again played the role of grieving child with unsettling perfection. He stood beside his aunt and uncle, head bowed, lips moving in prayer. Yet his pale eyes betrayed no sorrow. Margaret Whitmore noticed how they flicked from face to face, recording every expression of anguish, every tremor of a sobbing voice. And there at his side, the pocket watch gleamed in his small hand. She saw him flip it open, the still hands pointing to the very hour Gustav's body had been found. She shuddered, remembering the same motion during Emily's burial. That night, Margaret told Jonathan what she had seen. The watch moves, she insisted. Every time death comes near, those hands change. Jonathan, weary and half-drunk, snapped back. It's just an old relic. Stop seeing ghosts where there aren't any. But Margaret could not forget the look on her nephew's face, an expression too knowing for a child of 8. Meanwhile, Dr. Morton began to ask quiet questions around town. Had anyone else noticed strange misfortunes tied to the Whitmore boy? More than one farmer admitted their animals had died suddenly after Nathaniel wandered near. One spoke of calves tangled fatally in ropes, another of horses lamed without cause. And always someone had glimpsed Nathaniel nearby, his face pale, his manners polite, his presence oddly out of place. Morton's notes grew longer, his suspicions darker. "This is no ordinary child," he scrawled late one night. "He observes not as one who learns to live, but as one who dissects. His politeness is a mask, his silence a veil. Beneath it lies—" I dread to write what lies beneath. Still, Morton lacked proof. He had only fragments, observations, and whispers. And then came the third tragedy, one that would tear away any illusion of accident. In September, Samuel Reed, 6 years old, vanished while playing in the woods near his family's cabin. For days, neighbors combed the forest, their lanterns bobbing through the pines. And among them, tireless and uncomplaining, was Nathaniel Whitmore. The boy knew the terrain better than any of the men guiding them through thickets and across streams, as though he had walked every trail 100 times. On the 4th day, just before dawn, he appeared at the Reed home, his face pale with fatigue, yet steady. "I think I found something," he told Samuel's father. "There's an old well north of here. I heard crying. What they found inside that well would haunt the town forever and deepen the doctor's conviction that this boy was not what he seemed." The well was hidden deep in the woods, half choked by fallen logs and mats of tangled brush. The search party gathered at its rim, their lanterns swinging over the black mouth of stone. When the first cries echoed faintly upward, men gasped, some crossing themselves in disbelief. Down at the bottom, half a mile from where he'd last been seen, lay little Samuel Reed. His voice was hoarse, his skin gray, his eyes fluttering between wakefulness and delirium. He had survived 4 days with nothing but damp air and whatever rain had trickled through the cracks. Ropes were thrown, men scrambled, and Samuel was hauled up trembling like a leaf. His small body was limp, his lips cracked. Dr. Morton, summoned immediately, tried desperately to revive him. But Samuel's strength had been too thoroughly spent. By nightfall, the boy was gone, slipping away in the arms of his grieving parents. The town mourned again, the grief roar this time, sharpened by the cruelty of a survival so close to rescue. Yet Morton's thoughts lingered less on the tragedy than on the discovery itself. How had Nathaniel found the boy in such an obscure place? The well had been camouflaged too deliberately. The logs were not scattered by chance, but arranged to disguise the opening. It would have taken knowledge, patience, and intent. Morton stared at the rim, tracing the patterns of wood, noting their careful placement. He could not silence the suspicion Samuel Reed had not stumbled here. Someone had led him. Someone had hidden him. Back at the Reed cabin, as Samuel lay fading, Morton observed Nathaniel in the corner. The boy sat with his head bowed, his lips moving as if in prayer. But when Morton shifted to see his face, he realized Nathaniel wasn't praying. His eyes were fixed on Samuel, watching every ragged breath, every twitch of dying muscle, every flicker of consciousness, as though cataloging the passage from life to death. His expression was calm, no fear, no grief, only fascination. And when Samuel's final sigh left his body, Nathaniel's pale lips curved ever so slightly, not in sorrow, but in something Morton could only describe later as satisfaction. Margaret Whitmore, too, had noticed her nephew's strangeness. She told her husband she dreamt of Emily Parker, drenched in river water, standing by her bed, pointing toward Nathaniel. Jonathan dismissed it as nerves, but Margaret's unease grew. She began sleeping with the lantern lit, waking at every creak of the house, watching Nathaniel's door as though expecting it to open. She did not share this with the neighbors, fearing ridicule, but her whispers spread tension in the household. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's games with other children began to surface in murmurs. He would persuade them to play at pretend funerals, laying them flat in the grass, arranging their arms and instructing them to keep still as he took notes with a small slate. "Don't move," he'd say, his tone oddly commanding. "I need to see how long you can stay dead." Parents brushed it off as morbid imagination the kind boys sometimes entertained. Yet when Samuel Reed vanished, several children recalled how Nathaniel had insisted on making him play the part of a corpse just days before. Dr. Morton's journal grew darker still. "There is a coldness in this boy that I have seen only in men broken by war," he wrote. "He studies suffering with the eye of a surgeon, not the heart of a child. He deceives the town with courtesy, but beneath it lurks something I dare not name." Morton knew his suspicions would be met with disbelief. The accepted wisdom was that children were innocent by nature, corrupted only by circumstance. But what if nature itself had made Nathaniel hollow, incapable of empathy? Late one evening, Morton approached Jonathan and Margaret to discuss his concerns. The Whitmores listened uneasily. Jonathan shifted in his chair, rubbing his stiff back. "He's been a help to me," he said firmly. "The farm would have collapsed without him." Margaret, her voice sharp, countered. "He brings nothing but misfortune." "You know it, Jonathan. You've seen it." But Jonathan turned away, unwilling to face the possibility. To admit it would mean acknowledging that they had harbored something monstrous under their roof. The town tried to carry on, but dread seeped into every corner. Farmers spoke of securing their wells, mothers forbade their children from straying beyond the yard, and every death was weighed with suspicion. All the while, Nathaniel moved through the village like a ghost, always helpful, always polite, and always present where misfortune struck. Morton began to search more deliberately for proof. He followed Nathaniel at a distance, noting where he wandered. He asked quiet questions, listened to nervous testimonies. Each clue circled back to the same truth: this boy was at the center of an ever-widening ring of calamity. And then came the detail that bound his suspicions into dread certainty. During one of their conversations, Nathaniel let slip a mention of a place to think where he often spent hours alone. "The old storage barn by the North Woods," he said absently. "It's quiet there." The words struck Morton like a spark. He resolved that he must see the place himself, and what he would discover in that barn would finally shatter any pretense of innocence. The barn stood half-collapsed at the edge of the North Woods, its roof sagging under years of snow, its doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Few locals ventured near it. Children whispered it was haunted, and farmers dismissed it as a ruin unfit even for storage. But one late October afternoon, Dr. Elias Morton approached, lantern in hand, determined to uncover what Nathaniel had spoken of so casually. The air inside was thick with the scent of mold and dust. Shafts of light pierced through broken slats, revealing nests of straw and piles of forgotten tools. Yet beneath the decay lay something deliberate. Against the far wall stood a crude table, its surface scarred with knife marks. On the dirt floor, arranged with uncanny precision, were bones, small, delicate, and unmistakably animal. Morton's breath caught. Skulls of rabbits, rib cages of birds, skeletons of squirrels, all cleaned and placed in neat rows as if for study. His lantern beam moved across the wall where sheets of paper were pinned with bent nails. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Drawings rendered with startling skill for a child's hand depicted the same animals in stages of mutilation. Eyes removed, throats cut, limbs twisted at impossible angles. Each sketch was annotated in Nathaniel's careful handwriting. Subject remained conscious for 10 minutes, struggled less after pressure from the windpipe. The notes were precise, clinical, devoid of compassion. Then, deeper among the papers, Morton froze. These drawings were not of animals. One showed a small figure, hair tied with ribbons, lying face down in water. Emily Parker. Another depicted a man with broad shoulders at the base of a cliff, Gustav Nielsen. A third showed a boy curled at the bottom of a well, annotated with chilling observations: 4 days without water, delirium, shallow breath, death by exhaustion. It was Samuel Reed. Morton staggered back, bile rising in his throat. These were not mere sketches, they were records, case studies. Nathaniel had not simply witnessed these deaths, he had orchestrated them, planned them, and documented the results as if they were experiments. But the horror was not yet complete. On the table beside the drawings lay a bundle wrapped in cloth. Morton pulled it open with trembling hands. Inside were tools, crude but purposeful farm knives, sharpened to points hooks, bent into strange shapes, and even what appeared to be surgical instruments hammered out of metal scraps. They were stained dark, the color of dried blood. Next to them rested the pocket watch, identical to the one Nathaniel carried daily, but this one ticked faintly, though its hands never moved. Morton realized with a chill that Nathaniel kept the broken watch as a mask for the other, the one he used to record the precise hour of each experiment. Morton's lantern shook in his grasp. His training as a doctor demanded he document, collect, and analyze. But the man in him, the human, wanted only to flee. Still, he forced himself to continue flipping through a bundle of loose pages tucked beneath the tools. What he found nearly stopped his heart. These sketches were not of past victims. They were of people still alive, Jonathan and Margaret Whitmore. Detailed notes outlined possible methods poisoning, suffocation, cutting of the throat. And beside them in careful script a final line: to understand the reaction of those who trust me most. Morton dropped the pages, his hands slick with sweat. He knew now that Nathaniel was not finished. The boy's so-called family were next. But how could he bring this evidence forward? To the townsfolk, the idea that an 8-year-old could plot murder with such methodical cruelty was unthinkable. They would call him hysterical. Claymore had broken his mind. The sheriff might listen, but without proof tied directly to the boy's hand, what could be done? That evening, Morton confronted Nathaniel directly. He found the child sitting by the hearth at the Whitmore home, flipping his broken watch open and shut. The boy looked up with his usual courtesy. "Good evening, Dr. Morton," he said softly. "I've seen your barn." Morton replied, voice low, steady despite the storm in his chest. For the first time since he had known him, Nathaniel smiled. Not politely, not feigned, but genuine. It was the most unnerving sight Morton had ever seen. "You're not going to tell anyone," Nathaniel said, as though stating a fact rather than asking a question. "And why not?" Morton pressed. The boy closed the watch with a snap. "Because they won't believe you, and because—" He leaned forward, his pale eyes glittering in the firelight. "You're curious. You want to see what I'll do next." Morton swallowed, knowing the child was right. He was a physician, a man of science trained to observe. But the line between curiosity and complicity blurred dangerously in the presence of this boy. He forced himself to ask, "What are you planning, Nathaniel?" The child's smile widened. "I need to know what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely. Uncle Jonathan, Aunt Margaret, they'll never see it coming." The words dropped like stones into Morton's gut. The time for hesitation was over. He would need allies' evidence and a plan, because the boy's next experiment was already set in motion. The Whitmore farm lay in uneasy silence that November morning. Frost clung to the windows and a heavy stillness lingered in the air, broken only by the creak of wood as Dr. Elias Morton stepped out of his buggy. Sheriff Henry Wallace and 2 trusted deputies hid in the thicket beyond the barn, waiting for Morton's signal. They had agreed on a plan the night before Morton would enter as usual, under the pretense of tending Jonathan's failing back while the sheriff kept watch outside. It was dangerous, but with Nathaniel's intentions clear, there was no time to lose. As Morton approached the farmhouse, the unease gripped him at once. The usual sounds of live chickens scratching in the yard, pigs snorting in their pen were absent. Even the sheepdog was gone. He pushed the door open, and there in the threshold stood Nathaniel. The boy's pale face was expressionless, but his eyes burned with anticipation. "Good morning, Dr. Morton," he said with his careful politeness. His sleeves were rolled past his elbows, his small hands scrubbed raw as if in preparation for messy work. "I've been waiting for you." Morton's heart thudded in his chest. He stepped inside, keeping his tone even. "Where are your uncle and aunt?" "In their room," Nathaniel replied. "Sleeping." The doctor hurried down the hall, finding Jonathan and Margaret sprawled in bed. At first they appeared to be resting, but closer inspection revealed shallow, unnatural breaths. Their skin carried a gray tinge and their pulses fluttered weakly. Morton turned sharply. "What did you give them?" Nathaniel tilted his head, his smile faint. "Just some herbs I found in the woods. Did you know that certain plants can keep someone asleep for hours? It's very useful when you want peace and quiet." Morton bent over Jonathan, checking his pulse, weak but steady. Margaret was the same, deeply unconscious but alive. The dosage had been measured carefully. Nathaniel hadn't meant to kill them yet. He wanted them helpless. "They won't wake until nightfall," Nathaniel said calmly. "That gives us time to talk." And talk he did. For nearly an hour, the boy spoke with a chilling detachment, recounting his experiments. "Emily Parker," he said evenly, "taught me that drowning is slower than people imagine. She trusted me, and that made it easy." He moved on without hesitation. "Gustav Nielsen was different, too strong for me to overpower, so I prepared the cliff and startled him with bees. He fell exactly where I expected, and then Samuel Reed." Nathaniel's eyes seemed to shine as he remembered. "I wanted to see what happened when someone died slowly. I told him there were baby raccoons in the well. He climbed in willingly. I kept him alive long enough to measure how exhaustion weakens the body. Morton's throat was dry, his mind racing. Each account was monstrous, yet the boy spoke of them as though they were simple arithmetic. You see, Dr. Nathaniel continued, those were only trials. But now I need something different. I need to know what happens when the victim truly trusts me, when they are bound by love and cannot imagine betrayal. Uncle Jonathan, Aunt Margaret, they're perfect subjects. Morton steadied his voice. And what of me? Nathaniel. The boy's eyes gleamed. You are the most interesting of all. Because you understand me. You know what I am. That makes you the perfect witness and perhaps the perfect subject. I want to see what choices you'll make when it's your life and the lives of others on the line. As he spoke, Nathaniel began gathering objects from around the room. A coil of rope from the barn, a heavy candlestick, sharp kitchen knives. He laid them out methodically on the table like instruments in a surgical theater. Morton's pulse hammered. He knew the time for conversation was over. With deliberate calm, he drew his pistol from his medical bag and leveled it at the boy. Step away from the knives, Nathaniel. Instead of fear, Nathaniel showed only curiosity. That's a Colt Navy, isn't it? 6 rounds. He smiled faintly. 6 bullets for 6 people, yourself, my uncle, my aunt, the sheriff, and his 2 deputies outside. I wonder, doctor, if you fire at me, how many will be left unprotected? Morton's finger tightened on the trigger. But in that moment, Nathaniel lunged, a knife flashing in his hand. The boy's small frame moved with startling speed, his blade slashing across Morton's sleeve. Pain seared as blood welled, but Morton caught his wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the floor. Yet Nathaniel was prepared. Another blade appeared from his clothing, his movements precise, practiced, almost surgical. The struggle was fierce, violent, and shockingly even. Though smaller, Nathaniel fought with ferocity, darting and striking with the confidence of one who had studied anatomy intimately. Morton shouted for help as the boy's knife grazed his arm again. The door burst open. Sheriff Wallace and his deputies stormed in, weapons drawn. They found Morton grappling with Nathaniel, the unconscious Whitmores lying vulnerable in their bed. Deputy Collins pinned the boy, wrenching the blade from his hand. Nathaniel struggled for a moment, then went still, his pale eyes steady, his expression composed. You can't prove anything, he said evenly as the sheriff bound him with rope. No one will believe you. I'm just a child. Sheriff Wallace glared down at him, his jaw tight. Attempting to murder your own family is proof enough. You're not walking free again. Nathaniel's lips curled into a smile, the same genuine, unnerving smile Morton had seen before. You won't hang me. I'm too young, too interesting. Someone will want to study with me instead. His words echoed in the farmhouse like a curse, even as the sheriff dragged him away. For though Nathaniel was captured, Morton felt no relief. He knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something far darker. P6. The Asylum and the Escape. Nathaniel Whitmore did not go to the gallows. In 1872, the idea of hanging an 8-year-old was unthinkable, no matter how damning the evidence. The townspeople whispered of demons and curses, yet the courts dismissed Dr. Morton's claims as the product of war-shaken nerves. The bones, the drawings, the tools, all of it could be explained away as the grotesque imaginings of a traumatized orphan. But the attempted murder of Jonathan and Margaret Whitmore could not be denied. Even so, the law had no framework for a child so dangerous, too young for prison, yet too twisted for an orphanage. The compromise was swift and unsettling. Nathaniel would be remanded to the Vermont State Asylum in Brattleboro, where alienists could study him and perhaps rehabilitate him. The asylum loomed on a hill, a massive brick structure with barred windows and endless corridors that smelled of carbolic and damp stone. Here the hopeless were sent, men broken by drink, women crushed by grief, soldiers driven mad by war. It was meant to be a place of healing, but its walls echoed with screams at night. Into this world, Nathaniel walked with a calm composure that unsettled the staff. He didn't cry, did not resist, did not cling to his guardians. He merely observed pale eyes flicking across the barred halls as if cataloging them. Dr. Elias Morton accompanied him for the first months, filling journal after journal with his observations. At first, Nathaniel seemed compliant. He followed orders, attended daily sessions, and even participated in so-called therapeutic writing. The nurses praised his politeness, remarking how he thanked them with perfect sincerity each time they delivered food or medicine. Some even claimed he was improving. But Morton saw differently. He does not feel emotions, he wrote. He imitates them. Indeed, Nathaniel's performance was convincing, tears shed at the right moments, remorse expressed with childlike tremors in his voice, gratitude spoken with wide eyes and trembling hands. Yet when Morton watched longer, he saw the seams. The tears came without redness in the eyes. The remorse never lingered once the conversation ended. The boy's sadness was merely an echo, his joy a costume. One of the alienists, Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, took special interest in the case. Educated in Europe, she brought with her knowledge of coded writings once used by asylum patients overseas. When she examined Nathaniel's therapeutic journal, a small notebook filled with daily entries about sorrow, regret, and the hope of becoming better, she noticed patterns, letters repeated in strange intervals, phrases that did not match the boy's supposed state of mind. Applying her methods, she uncovered a hidden cipher beneath the innocent surface. The decoded text chilled her to the bone. Nathaniel had been recording not his feelings, but his strategies. Day 47. Nurse E shows sympathy when I cry. 3 more weeks should grant permission for physical contact during therapy. Dr. Morton believes I'm curious, not dangerous. His interest weakens him. The journal was not the confession of a repentant child, but the blueprint of a predator, learning how to control those around him. Among the sketches, she noticed a recurring symbol, a pocket watch, its hands frozen at 3:30. Nathaniel had drawn it again and again, as if marking the moment of death in every entry. Morton read the entries with a growing sickness in his stomach. He realized Nathaniel had been studying the staff as carefully as he once studied animals and neighbors. Every nurse, every doctor, every guard analyzed, cataloged, manipulated. He was creating what Morton could only describe as a handbook of human weakness. Meanwhile, strange incidents unsettled the asylum. Patients in nearby wards died unexpectedly: an elderly man of sudden heart failure, a young woman from a fall in the stairwell. These were not uncommon in such an institution, but Morton noted they occurred soon after Nathaniel had been seen wandering close to those wings. The evidence was circumstantial, the timing troubling, but never conclusive. No evidence ever tied Nathaniel to these deaths, Morton admitted, yet the timing unsettled the staff. To me, it felt less like coincidence and more like careful observation taken one step too far. Still, many doctors clung to the belief he could be rehabilitated. He is clever, they said. Clever children can be guided if given proper structure. Morton argued bitterly against them, warning that Nathaniel was only refining his deception. He studies you as you study him, he told Dr. Fitzgerald. And he learns faster than any of us. One evening, Fitzgerald discovered Nathaniel had convinced a nurse to give him extra paper and pencils, claiming he wanted to practice drawing flowers as therapy. What he produced was no innocent sketch. Hidden among drawings of daisies and oaks were diagrams of locks, keys, and floor layouts of the asylum. The boy was mapping his cage. By the summer of 1874, the inevitable happened. During what should have been a routine transfer between wings, Nathaniel vanished. Guards swore they had kept him under constant supervision, yet in the span of moments he was gone. Doors showed no sign of force. Windows remained barred. The official report blamed negligence, but Morton knew better. He planned this for months, he wrote in his final asylum entry. By the time he moved, he understood this place better than the men who built it. His escape was not desperation, it was design. The asylum tightened its procedures after the escape, but it was too late. Nathaniel Whitmore had vanished into the forests of Vermont, leaving behind only his coded journals and a trail of unease that would haunt the staff for years. And as reports of strange deaths trickled across New England, accidents too deliberate to be chance, Dr. Morton realized the truth. The boy had not been cured nor captured. He had been unleashed. The winter after Nathaniel's escape was the coldest Vermont had seen in years. Snow piled high against doors, barns collapsed under the weight of ice. And yet the real chill came not from the weather, but from whispers carried from farm to farm. People spoke of accidents that no longer felt like accidents. Horses breaking legs on smooth ground, children vanishing near frozen ponds, livestock found dead with their throats cut clean. Always someone swore they'd seen a pale boy nearby, polite as ever, offering help when disaster struck. None could prove it, but the pattern was unmistakable. Dr. Elias Morton began gathering reports. From Montpelier to small towns scattered across New England, he collected accounts of misfortune that bore Nathaniel's signature. A farmer in New Hampshire described calves strangled by ropes in a way no animal could have managed. A widow in Maine told of her daughter lured into the woods by a kind boy who promised to show her fox kits, only for the girl to be found hours later near a well, barely alive. In Massachusetts, a blacksmith fell from a ladder under strange circumstances with bees clustered around his body just as they had around Gustav Nielsen. Morton's journals filled with these stories, his handwriting growing more frantic with each entry. He is moving one line, read like a shadow across the countryside. Each incident bears his methodical hand, planned, rehearsed, executed. He does not kill for rage nor for need. He kills to learn. Morton mailed copies of his notes to colleagues in Boston and Philadelphia, pleading for them to take the matter seriously. Most dismissed him. Some said he was chasing ghosts born of his own trauma, but Morton knew. Nathaniel was no ghost. He was flesh and blood growing stronger, more cunning with each passing season. Back in Montpelier, the Whitmore farm became a place of dread. Jonathan and Margaret, both alive but scarred by the ordeal, could not bear to remain there. They abandoned the land, leaving the farmhouse to rot, its shutters clattering in the wind like broken teeth. The property reverted to the county, yet no one wanted it. Even squatters refused to stay, claiming the nights were filled with strange noises, the sound of scratching beneath the floorboards, or a child's laughter echoing faintly through the empty barn. The old storage barn where Morton had found bones and drawings was sealed by Sheriff Wallace. He had the doors chained, the windows boarded, the surrounding brush burned to the ground. But memory has a way of seeping through barriers. Local children dared each other to approach, swearing they saw lantern light flicker inside at night. Hunters reported their dogs refusing to enter the clearing. And soon a legend grew. The barn was cursed, and any animal grazing near it would sicken and die. Margaret Whitmore confided to a neighbor before leaving town that she feared Nathaniel would one day return. "He knows us," she said. "He knows we trusted him once. That's what he craves, trust, so he can break it." She and Jonathan lived the rest of their lives under assumed names in another county, refusing ever to speak publicly of their nephew. Meanwhile, Nathaniel became a ghost story parents told their children to keep them in line. "Don't wander too far," they'd warn. "Nathaniel will find you." Campfire tales in Vermont and beyond carried his name, though twisted by time. Some said he was a demon child born of a witch. Others swore he was a restless spirit condemned to roam forever, but Morton's private journals told another story, one he feared no one wanted to hear. Nathaniel was no myth. He was real, and he was still learning. As the years passed, Morton aged. His hair turned white, his hands shook when he wrote, but his pursuit never waned. He traced reports of the polite boy through county records, obituaries, and letters from distant towns. Sometimes the details were faint, a whisper buried in a coroner's note. Other times they were unmistakable, the same methods, the same unsettling coincidences. Each entry in his journal was a wound, proof that Nathaniel had not been stopped, that he had simply vanished into the folds of America's countryside, free to experiment again and again. By the late 1880s, Morton confessed in his writings that he no longer sought to catch the boy. "I fear it is impossible," he wrote. "What I seek now is understanding. Was he born without the faculties we call conscience? Or did some hidden cruelty awaken it in him? If the former, then Nathaniel is not alone. He is a glimpse of what others may become." The question weighed on him until his final days. In his last entry, penned in 1891, Morton admitted what no scientist of his age dared voice aloud. Perhaps evil is not merely taught. Perhaps it is born concealed behind the face of innocence, waiting for time to sharpen its teeth. The Whitmore property was eventually sold to developers, but locals avoided it for decades. The barn's foundation crumbled into the soil, but its story lingered. Even today, some say animals shy from the land, refusing to graze where Nathaniel once played. And in quiet moments, when shadows lengthen in old Vermont farmhouses, some claim to hear a faint sound. The snap of a pocket watch opening and closing its hands, frozen forever at the hour death came calling. When Elias Morton died in 1891, his daughter inherited a trunk filled with his journals. She found them bound in leather, each page crowded with neat script and sketches that chronicled more than 20 years of obsession. To her horror, they were not simply the records of a physician, but the confessions of a man haunted by a single child. She debated burning them, fearful of the darkness they contained, but ultimately she delivered the collection to the Vermont Historical Society. There, the writings were sealed away, available only to those who could prove a legitimate academic purpose. Inside the pages, Morton's voice never wavered from his conviction Nathaniel Whitmore had been real. He had walked among them, learned from them, deceived them, and escaped them. Morton had traced him through scattered reports, accidents that were too deliberate, deaths that were too staged. In towns across New England, whispers matched his descriptions. A pale boy, courteous, strangely helpful in times of tragedy. Sometimes he appeared in obituaries as the one who discovered the body. Other times he disappeared altogether, leaving only rumors in his wake. By the turn of the century, the legend of Nathaniel had grown. Folklore painted him as a demon child, a changeling, or even a curse laid upon Vermont after the Civil War. Parents scolded children not to play alone near wells or wander the woods after dark, warning Nathaniel will find you. His name became shorthand for danger, as though speaking it aloud might summon his ghost. Yet among scholars, Morton's journals raised more troubling questions. Could a child truly be born devoid of empathy, stripped of conscience from the start? Or was Nathaniel the product of war's aftermath, loss, trauma, and neglect crystallized into something monstrous? Meanwhile, the Whitmore name disappeared. Jonathan and Margaret lived quietly under false identities, never returning to Montpelier. They died childless, leaving no descendants to carry their story. Neighbors spoke of them rarely, as though the memory itself was dangerous to summon. The old Whitmore farm was eventually parceled off its structures, rotted to nothing, but even decades later, locals avoided the land. Hunters claimed their dogs refused to enter the clearing where the barn once stood. Farmers swore livestock grew restless when driven too close. And some late-night travelers crossing the valley road whispered of a figure small, pale, polite, watching from the tree line. By the 1920s, Morton's journals were quietly cited in psychiatric circles, though never by name. Doctors studying antisocial behavior in children hinted at the Vermont case, using it as evidence that empathy might not be universal. To this day, historians debate whether Nathaniel was an early example of psychopathy centuries before the term existed, or whether his story blurred into myth. But for those who read Morton's words directly, there was no doubt. His careful records detailed not only Nathaniel's crimes, but his intentions. One line scrawled in Morton's trembling hand still chills researchers. If he survives to adulthood, he will walk among us as a man who understands us better than we understand ourselves, who can mimic our smiles, our tears, and our fears, yet feels none of them. Nathaniel Whitmore was never found. No body was recovered, no confirmed sighting recorded in official archives. He simply vanished into the forests of New England, leaving behind stories that still unsettle the region more than a century later. Some say he died young, claimed by illness or accident. Others believe he grew into adulthood, changing names as easily as masks, and continued his experiments in the shadows of America's growing cities. And then there are those who claim he still lingers not in body but in legend. Campfires still spark with tales of the boy who carried a broken pocket watch, its hands frozen at the hour of death. Children still dare one another to whisper his name by an abandoned well, and in the archives of Vermont Morton's journals remain their pages fragile with age but their words sharp as ever, waiting for the next scholar brave enough to open them. So the question lingers unanswered. Was Nathaniel Whitmore a singular horror, or was he merely the first glimpse of a darkness hidden in human nature itself? What do you think? Did history reveal all of Nathaniel's story, or did he escape into adulthood, his experiments continuing under another name, another face? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more of history's forgotten mysteries, subscribe to our channel, because sometimes the past is darker than any fiction.